My name is Grayson Stanley, and I have built things in this city that will outlast me by 50 years. I have put my name on buildings between downtown Houston and the Galleria that altered the skyline permanently. I have closed deals that moved serious money through this city's economy and never lost a night's sleep over any of them. I am not a man given to doubt, to hesitation, or to the particular sentimentality that causes other men to look backward when they should be moving forward. But there is one decision I made at 27 years old that I have thought about every single day since. Her name is Ruby Layla. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 3 months before I saw her again. My assistant Priya knocked twice and told me there was an elderly woman on the line. Soft-spoken, she said, asking whether I remembered a girl named Ruby Layla. I had 4 calls queued behind a term sheet I was reviewing. I told Priya to take a number. Then I sat for 60 seconds staring at nothing on my desk and told her to put the call through. The woman's name was Dorothea Wynne. She introduced herself with the careful formality of someone uncertain they have the right to take up another person's time. She explained that she had found my office number through a chain of Houston connections so long and improbable it could only exist in a city that still remembers when it was smaller. I told her the how didn't matter. I asked what was on her mind. She told me about Ruby. Not the Ruby I had carried in my memory for 11 years. Not the 25-year-old who had driven out of Houston with a scholarship and $60 and a silence so final it felt like a door sealed from the inside. Dorothea told me about the Ruby who had existed in the years since. An architecture firm called Layla Studio, built from a single rented desk in a shared Austin office. Commercial renovation contracts won without a single referral from anyone who already knew her name. And 8 years of quiet monthly wire transfers arriving in Dorothea's bank account without announcement, without expectation, without a word to anyone who might have offered Ruby recognition for it. She paid off my house, Dorothea said, the one on Belfort Avenue in South Park. 8 years, every single month. She never told a living soul. I said nothing. I am not well, Dorothea continued, and I have children who have not been what children ought to be. I worry about that house when I'm gone. I thought someone should know what Ruby did for me. A pause. I thought someone should know the kind of woman she is. She thanked me for my time and ended the call. I thought about that conversation every day for 3 months, not obsessively. I am not built for obsession, but in the way that certain truths surface in the quiet margins of a busy life, when the work goes still, and there is nothing between you and the thing you have been carefully not examining. For 11 years, I had told myself that Ruby Layla had moved on completely, had rebuilt herself so thoroughly that Houston was simply a city she had once passed through. Dorothea's phone call did not disprove that. It told me something more important. Ruby had spent 11 years being exactly who she had always been, quietly and without witness, and this city had no real understanding of what it had allowed to walk out the door. The morning of the funeral, I drove to Bradshaw Carter Memorial on West Alabama Street. It was a Thursday in June, the Houston heat already absolute before 9 in the morning. Not the heat of discomfort, but the heat of declaration, the city announcing itself before the day had fully begun. Bradshaw Carter is a red-brick Georgian building behind a row of summer-blooming crepe myrtles, dignified and unhurried. The kind of place that has made peace with grief, rather than trying to manage it into something more presentable. I arrived early. I took a seat in the 4th pew on the right, close enough to see everything, far enough back that my presence read as respectful rather than conspicuous. The chapel filled. I recognized Celeste Wynne Pryor from a photograph I had found 3 months earlier when I began asking quiet questions about Dorothea's family. Eldest daughter, 52 years old, composed in the way of a woman who had been rehearsing this occasion for some time. She moved through the front of the chapel with the practiced warmth of someone receiving guests at an event she had organized, rather than mourning a woman she had lost. I kept my eyes on the rear entrance. She came in 12 minutes late. Ruby Layla walked through the back door, and I knew her before I had finished processing what I was seeing. 11 years change a face, settle it into its definitive form, add weight to the eyes, give the posture the authority that accumulates in someone who has been making real decisions and living inside their full consequences. But there are things in a person that do not change. The way Ruby carried herself was exactly as I remembered: straight spine, chin level, shoulders set with the deliberateness of a woman who had understood in the parking lot that this room would be difficult and had resolved before she reached the door that it would not move her. She wore a dark dress and a coat slightly too large at the shoulders, worn for meaning rather than fit. She held a printed program in both hands, not the one being distributed at the entrance, but one she had clearly made herself. I understood immediately. I understood, watching her face register the rearranged flowers, the replaced program, the absence of her name from every surface, that she had organized and financed far more than a document. She took the last pew alone. She said nothing. Celeste took the podium and spoke about her mother with the polished ease of someone describing a relationship that bore little resemblance to what had actually existed between them. Ruby sat with her hands folded and her expression arranged into the specific composure that is not peace, but the sustained muscular decision to perform it, because the alternative is to give someone exactly what they came for. Then Celeste said it. Into the microphone clearly with the chapel at full capacity, she said that Dorothea's one abiding regret had been her lifelong habit of opening her home to strays who never developed the basic decency to be grateful. The room went still, the way rooms go still when something irreversible has been spoken in front of witnesses. I looked at Celeste first. She returned to her seat with the composed expression of a woman satisfied with the precision of her damage. Then I turned. Ruby's hands were trembling, imperceptibly, not in any way the room could detect. But I was 6 feet away and I could see the controlled tension in her knuckles, the disciplined stillness she was imposing on every visible surface of herself. She looked at the floor. She drew one slow breath, not for oxygen, but for the 3 seconds required to make a decision. Then she stood. She was not making a scene. She was leaving. There is a profound and particular dignity in understanding the difference between those two choices, and Ruby Layla had always possessed that understanding more completely than anyone I had ever known. She stepped into the aisle and reached out blindly, the way a person reaches for a wall in the dark. Her fingers closed around my forearm. She did not look at me. She was focused on the floor, composing her expression, buying herself the second she needed before she could walk out of that building with her head level and her bearing undisturbed. I did not pull back. I did not shift or speak or do anything at all. I let her hold on. I sat there with her hand on my arm, and I thought about a woman who had tracked down my office number from a hospice bed because she wanted someone to know what Ruby had done for her, quietly, for 8 years, without telling a single person. I thought about every one of those wire transfers arriving on the 1st of the month into the account of a woman whose own children visited on holidays and left early. I thought about a 25-year-old driving out of this city with $60 and a scholarship and a sealed door behind her, and the 11 years of extraordinary, unwitnessed work she had built on the other side of it. Ruby's grip eased. She steadied herself. She lifted her chin. I kept my arm exactly where it was and said quietly enough that only she could hear, "Don't. You don't have to move." She went completely still. She did not look at me. Not yet. But she stayed. We sat through the closing prayer side by side. Two people who had not spoken in 11 years, in a room where one woman had just tried to erase the other in front of everyone she had ever known. When the final words were spoken, I saw Celeste Wynne Pryor's gaze cross the chapel and find Ruby. She smiled, composed and unhurried. The smile of a woman who considers a matter satisfactorily resolved. I had seen that smile in boardrooms. I knew exactly what it contained. It meant, this is not finished. Ruby stood and moved toward the back door with the quiet purpose of a woman who has long understood that composure is not the absence of feeling. It is the decision to feel everything on your own terms, in your own time, in a room where no one is permitted to watch. I let her reach the door first. Then I followed her out into the Houston heat and called her name across the parking lot. She stopped walking. That was how it began, not with a plan, not with the speech I had half rehearsed for 11 years, with a woman's hand on my arm in the dark, and the only decision that mattered, to hold still and let her hold on. Some things are that simple. Most of the important ones are. Chapter 2. Both names, like it used to be. I called her name across the parking lot and she stopped walking. Not immediately. There was a half-second delay, the kind that tells you a person heard, processed, and then made a conscious decision about whether to keep moving. She chose to stop. I took that as the only encouragement I had any right to expect, and I crossed the asphalt toward her. The June heat was absolute. The crepe myrtles along the Bradshaw Carter driveway stood in full bloom, their blossoms heavy and motionless in the airless afternoon. Ruby had her back to me, dark coat folded over one arm, shoulders set, posture as deliberate as everything else about her. She did not turn around immediately. She gave herself a moment first. I recognized that, understood it, and waited. When she turned, I saw her face in full daylight for the first time in 11 years. I had spent portions of those 11 years reminding myself that memory is an unreliable curator. That the version of Ruby Layla I carried in my mind was the idealized construction of a man who had made a grave error and needed to believe the loss was proportionate to the guilt. I had told myself this with reasonable conviction. Standing in that parking lot, I understood I had been wrong. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as preemptive. She had already decided before I opened my mouth exactly how much of herself she intended to offer this conversation. The answer was almost nothing, and she had the composure to hold that line without making it cruel. "Grayson," she said, not a greeting, an acknowledgement, precise and bounded, communicating that she knew who I was and had decided not to pretend otherwise. "Ruby Layla," I said. Something moved across her face, brief and involuntary, and then gone, the way a door opens a fraction before a careful hand pulls it shut. I had always called her both names, from the first week I knew her, when we were young and living in adjacent circumstances on Mandel Street in Montrose. She, in a rented room, me 3 blocks away in the house my parents were renting before my father's circumstances changed everything. I had called her Ruby Layla, the way you say a name when you mean it as a complete and irreducible thing, rather than a label attached for convenience. Nobody had said it that way to her in years. I could see that plainly in her face before she reassembled her expression. "I have to go," she said. "5 minutes," I said. "Please." She looked at me for a long moment with the assessing steadiness of someone calculating the precise cost of what is being asked. Then she moved to a low stone wall at the edge of the parking lot, away from the people still filtering through the chapel's front doors, and she sat. She did not invite me to sit beside her. I sat beside her anyway, leaving a careful distance between us, and I began. I had rehearsed some version of this conversation in the margins of 11 years, not obsessively. I had not spent a decade scripting speeches to a woman who had built a full life without me and wanted nothing from my regret. But in the way that unresolved things surfaced during the quiet, unguarded hours, I had turned the shape of what I should have said over and over in my mind. Every rehearsed version dissolved the moment I was actually sitting beside her. What came out was plain and without ornamentation, which was almost certainly the only version she would have tolerated. I was wrong, I said. What I did 11 years ago, the way I ended things, the absence of any real explanation, it was wrong. I knew it when I did it. I have known it every year since. She did not react, with the visible relief of someone who had been waiting to hear this. She did not soften or lean toward me, or offer any of the responses that, in weaker moments, I might have constructed fantasies around. She looked at the parking lot. She let the silence hold its full weight. "Why are you here?" she said finally. "At Dorothea's funeral." "You didn't know Dorothea?" "She called me," I said. Ruby turned and looked at me directly for the first time. I told her everything. The phone call in March, Dorothea's careful introduction, the chain of connection that had led her to my office number, what she had told me, the wire transfers. 8 years, the house on Belfort Avenue in South Park. The fact that Ruby had never said a word to anyone about any of it. Ruby looked away. A muscle moved in her jaw. "She had no business doing that," she said quietly. "She was dying," I said, "and she wanted someone to know who you were. I think she chose me deliberately. I think Dorothea Wynne was considerably more strategic than either of us recognized while she was alive." Ruby said nothing for a moment. Then, so quietly I nearly missed it, "She never said a word to me. She knew you would have told her to stop." A long pause. Ruby pressed her lips together and looked at the crepe myrtle blossoms overhead. I watched her absorb it. The knowledge that the woman she had spent 8 years quietly caring for had spent her final months quietly caring back in the only way available to her. It was not a simple thing to receive. For a woman who had constructed her entire adult life around self-sufficiency, being seen, truly known, witnessed and considered was not a comfortable experience. It cost her something to sit with it, and she did not try to conceal that cost from me, which told me more about the progress we had made in 10 minutes than anything either of us had said. She straightened her posture. Decision made. "What do you want, Grayson?" It was a direct question, and she deserved a direct answer. "Nothing today," I said. "Today I wanted to be in that building because Dorothea asked me to be, in her own way. That is the entirety of it." She studied me with the focused attention of a woman assessing a structure for concealed flaws. It was, I would come to understand this fully later, precisely how she approached everything that genuinely mattered to her, methodically, without sentiment obscuring her judgment. "You built something," she said. It was not quite a question. "My father made a land deal in 2006 that changed our circumstances. I built on what he created. Commercial real estate, mixed-use development primarily, some acquisitions. We have assets between downtown and the Galleria corridor." She nodded slowly, filing it away with the efficiency of someone who processes information cleanly and without waste. I thought about what I knew of Ruby's trajectory, what Dorothea had told me, and what I had found in the months since. Layla Studio, the architecture firm she had built in Austin around commercial renovation and historic preservation work. The kind of practice that requires not only technical mastery, but a genuine reverence for the history embedded in old materials, the belief that what came before deserves to be understood before it is altered. 18 months earlier, she had completed a rehabilitation of a 1940s commercial block near the University of Texas campus that the city had been scheduled to demolish. The project had been written about in an architectural journal I had not previously read and had been reading with some regularity in the months since. "Your firm," I said. "Layla Studio, the Nueces Street project in Austin, the 1940s block near UT, I read about it." She looked at me with a sharpness that was not quite suspicion and not quite surprise, but something precisely between them. That was published in an architectural trade journal, she said. I know, I said. I read it there. You read architectural trade journals? Since approximately 14 months ago, I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Something moved across her face, brief and involuntary, caught and released before it could develop into anything she hadn't authorized. That is a strange thing to admit, she said. I am attempting not to be dishonest with you, I said. I believe I exhausted my allocation of dishonesty 11 years ago. She looked away. The parking lot was nearly empty now. The last of the mourners had dispersed into the thick afternoon. Inside Bradshaw Carter, Celeste Wynne Pryor would be accepting the final condolences, collecting the last returns on the performance she had delivered at that podium. I thought about the words strays carried through the microphone and held in the chapel air, and I felt something cold and precise that I kept entirely to myself because this was not the moment for it. Ruby stood. I appreciate you being there, she said. Inside, She paused, finding the honest version rather than the easy one. Having something solid to hold for a moment. I want you to know I'm aware of what that was. The precision of her gratitude was completely characteristic. Not thank you for your kindness, but a specific acknowledgement of the exact thing that had been useful and precisely why. Ruby Layla had never been imprecise about anything that carried genuine weight. You're staying in Houston through the week, I said. Through Friday. If anything comes up while you're here, anything you need, I'd like you to call me. She regarded me with that same level, assessing quality. I'm not fragile, Grayson. I know that, I said. I have always known that. I'm not offering because I think you require managing. I'm offering because I would like to be useful to you if the opportunity presents itself. Those are meaningfully different things. She considered that distinction for a moment. Then she put on her coat, an almost deliberate act given the temperature, a small assertion of self-possession, and straightened it with 2 precise adjustments. I'll think about it, she said. She walked to her rental car and drove out of the Bradshaw Carter lot without looking back. I stood in the afternoon heat and watched her turn onto West Alabama and disappear into the thick golden light of a Houston summer afternoon. I stood there for a while. Across the city, in South Park, on a modest street named for a Second World War battle, there was a house that Ruby Layla had paid off over 8 years and never once mentioned to a living soul. A dying woman had wanted someone to know. She had chosen me from all the people she could have called. I thought about the word deliberate and everything it contained. Then I walked to my car and drove back to Louisiana Street and sat in my office for the remainder of the afternoon without reviewing a single document, which was, if I am being honest, the most productive afternoon I had spent in years. Chapter 3. What I Should Have Said at 27. She called me the following morning. I was on the ramp to the Southwest Freeway when her name appeared on the screen. I had entered her number the previous afternoon from the small cream-colored business card she had produced from her coat pocket with the reluctance of someone offering something they are not yet certain the other person has earned, a card that read simply, Ruby Layla / Layla Studio / Austin, Texas. No tagline, no description of services. The restraint of it was entirely in keeping with everything I remembered about her. I answered before the second ring completed. I want to walk somewhere, she said. Quiet, not crowded. Do you know anywhere near Midtown that works at 8 in the morning? I knew exactly where. 30 minutes later, we were on the hike and bike trail along Buffalo Bayou, west of Shepherd Drive, moving at the unhurried pace of 2 people who have agreed, without stating it, that the destination is beside the point. The morning light came off the water in long, flat plains. A pair of kayakers moved downstream in easy silence. Somewhere above us on the War Drive Bridge, the Mexican free-tailed bat colony was settling in for the day after a night's hunting. Nearly 500,000 animals folded into the bridge's expansion joints, invisible and improbable, and entirely, verifiably real. I had always found something clarifying about that fact. Things of tremendous scale can exist in plain sight and go completely unnoticed by people with other things on their minds. Ruby walked with her hands in her jacket pockets. She had dressed practically, dark trousers, running shoes, a light jacket against the early river air. She looked like a woman who had been awake for some time before she called me. She looked like a woman who had made a decision during those waking hours and was now executing it with characteristic efficiency. "Tell me what happened," she said. "The full version. Not the one you think I can manage. The actual one." I had been preparing for this since the parking lot the previous afternoon, and before that, if I am honest, for years. I took a breath of bayou air and I told her the truth. In the spring of the year, Ruby was accepted into the graduate architecture program at the University of Texas. My mother called me into the kitchen of our rented house on Mandel Street on a Sunday afternoon and told me, with exceptional care and no visible emotion, that she needed me to think seriously about my future. Norma Stanley has never required volume. She has never needed to raise her voice because she has always understood that the most durable influence is the kind that does not announce itself as pressure. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she did not drink, and she said that she and my father had been talking and that they were very fond of Ruby, and that what any loving parent wants for their child is a future built on the most solid foundation available. I was 27 years old. My father's land deal had closed the previous year. The Stanley family had moved from Mandel Street to a rented house in West University Place, while we tried to understand what the changed circumstances actually meant and who we were allowed to become inside them. My mother was in the early stages of that understanding, already beginning to construct, with the patience and precision she brought to everything, a version of the Stanley name that matched the version of the future she could now see. She was not malicious. I want to be precise about this because it matters. She was not a cruel woman acting from cruelty. She was an ambitious woman acting from ambition, and in that particular moment, those two things produced an identical result. She did not say Ruby was wrong for me because Ruby was black. My mother was far too careful for that directness, and she would have rejected the characterization entirely. What she said was that Ruby had no safety net, no established family connections, no social footing in the circles the Stanley family was beginning to occupy. She said that love was not practical architecture, that sentiment alone could not bear the structural load of a lasting life. She said that a woman of Ruby's background would always be reaching towards something, and that I would spend my years as the destination she was reaching for, rather than as a partner she had chosen from equal ground. She said all of this with tremendous gentleness. That was the most disorienting part. My Aunt Patrice was considerably less refined in her delivery. She told me at a family dinner 3 weeks later that a man in my new position needed to exercise judgment about the impression created by his associations. She used the word impression with the casual ease of someone who has never been required to examine it. I listened to both of them. I formulated objections in my mind that I did not voice. I told myself I was being mature, giving the arguments proper consideration before dismissing them. I told myself I was protecting Ruby from a family that was not ready for her. I was protecting myself from a confrontation with my mother that I was not certain I could win. The difference between those two things is the difference between an honorable decision and a cowardly one, and I did not have sufficient self-knowledge at 27 to see it. "You ended it with a phone call," Ruby said. We had stopped walking. We stood on the trail with the bayou moving behind us and the downtown skyline visible through the canopy to the east. glass towers catching the morning light, construction cranes turning slowly in the pale sky above them. Yes, I said. You told me you needed space to understand what you wanted. Those were your exact words. Yes. And what you actually wanted, she said, was to avoid the fight with your mother. Yes, I said. That is exactly what it was. She nodded, not with satisfaction, with the specific sober recognition of someone who has suspected the true shape of a thing for a very long time and is now having it confirmed by the only person whose confirmation matters. I understood that this was not a relief. It is one thing to suspect, for 11 years, that you were set aside for a reason that had nothing to do with your worth. It is another thing entirely to hear it stated plainly, in a parking lot by a bayou in June, by the person who set you aside. I left with $60, she said. Did you know that? Not then, I know it now. I had $60 and a full scholarship and a room reserved in graduate housing in Austin. I drove the entire way without stopping because I was afraid if I stopped, I would turn around. She paused. Not to come back to you. I was afraid I would turn around and simply stop, decide it was all too much and go back to Sunnyside and find some smaller version of a life and convince myself it was sufficient. She said this without drama, without performance. It was a plain account of a specific fear examined from many angles over many years, and she offered it the way she offered everything important, directly, without softening it for the listener's comfort. What kept you going, I said. She looked at the water. Dorothea, she said. I thought about Dorothea in that house on Belfort Avenue, how she had taken in a 9-year-old girl whose mother had just died, with no money and no safety net and no particular reason for optimism about anything, and how she had never once, in all the years I lived with her, suggested that a smaller life was the appropriate ambition. Ruby stopped, drew a breath. She never taught me to aim low. I could not dishonor that by stopping on the side of the road in Bastrop County because a man had decided I was not worth a difficult conversation. I had nothing to say. There was nothing adequate to say. We began walking again. The trail curved westward and the skyline retreated behind the tree canopy. The bayou moved beside us, brown and unhurried, and smelling of silt and summer and the particular mineral quality of water that has been moving through the same landscape for a very long time. I'm not telling you this because I want your guilt, Ruby said, after a while. I have no use for your guilt. It helps nothing. I know, I said. I'm telling you because you asked for the full version. And because Dorothea decided you were worth calling, and I owe it to her judgment to give you an accurate picture of what actually happened. She glanced at me sideways. She did not call you arbitrarily. Dorothea never did anything without a reason. No, I said. I'm beginning to understand that. We walked without speaking for a stretch. The trail took us past a stand of cypress trees gripping the bank, with the tenacity of things that have grown slowly and made their peace with difficulty. A great blue heron stood motionless on a half-submerged log 20 feet from the trail, watching the water with the absolute, unhurried patience of a creature that has never once doubted its own purpose. Ruby noticed it. She slowed her pace slightly, watching it for a moment without comment, and then continued walking. She did not feel the need to remark on everything she found beautiful. That, too, was characteristic. When we turned back toward Shepherd Drive, she spoke again. I'm here through Friday, she said. I have a meeting tomorrow with a potential client, someone interested in a renovation project in the Heights. Otherwise, I have no fixed obligations. Then let me take you to dinner tomorrow evening, I said. Somewhere you choose. She walked for several steps without responding. I'll think about it, she said. It was the second time in 2 days she had offered me those 4 words. I was beginning to understand their precise meaning, that with Ruby Layla, I'll think about it was not deflection or politeness or a gentle way of saying no. It was a genuine commitment to apply the full weight of her considerable mind to a question and return with an answer that was actually true. She did not say things she did not mean. She simply did not speak until she meant them. It was, I realized, the quality I had most admired in her when I was 27 and had been too distracted by my own inadequacy to deserve. The heron on the log had not moved. I envied it briefly and sincerely, its absolute certainty about where it needed to be. Chapter 4. The call I made before I talked myself out of it. Dwight Okafor called me at 7:45 the following morning. I was already at my desk on the 38th floor of 1500 Louisiana Street, the tower my father had always pointed to when I was a boy as the most arrogant building in downtown Houston, the one that had been the headquarters of a company whose collapse had taken a portion of the city's confidence with it. I had never entirely disagreed with my father's assessment of its arrogance, but the building itself had outlasted the company, as buildings tend to do. And from my window on the 38th floor, the view of the city spreading southward toward the ship channel on a clear morning was one of the few things in my professional life that still produced something resembling genuine wonder. Dwight and I had operated in the same professional orbit for 11 years. He was among the finest property litigators in Harris County, methodical, undemonstrative, the kind of attorney who constructs his cases with such thorough preparation that by the time a matter reaches a judge, the outcome has already been made inevitable. We had been introduced through a title dispute on one of my father's early land acquisitions in 2008, and in the years since we had referred each other business with the reliable consistency of two professionals who understand that trustworthy relationships are worth protecting. He opened without pleasantries. Celeste Wynne Pryor filed a will contest yesterday afternoon, he said. Dorothea Wynne's estate. I know you were at the service. I set down my coffee. How do you know I was there? I said. Because Dorothea called me in February, he said. Same as she called you. I absorbed this without speaking for a moment. Dorothea Wynne had been more systematic in her preparations than either of us had fully grasped. She had not made one phone call from her hospice bed. She had made several to specific people, for specific reasons, with the particular foresight of a woman who understood exactly what her family was capable of when she was no longer present to constrain them, and who had spent her final months constructing whatever defenses she could reach from a hospital bed. The will leaves the Belfort Avenue property in South Park to a woman named Ruby Layla, Dwight continued. Celeste is filing on grounds of undue influence. She is alleging that Ruby cultivated a manipulative financial relationship with an elderly woman over a period of years in order to secure an inheritance she had no legitimate claim to. That is entirely false, I said. I know it is, Dwight said. That is why I'm calling you at 7:45 in the morning. He explained the situation with his customary efficiency. The Wynne family's attorney was a man named Gerald Fitch, whose practice specialized precisely in this category of estate dispute, not because the cases were legally complex, but because they were financially exhausting. Fitch's method was delay. He filed motions, requested continuances, extended timelines, and generated legal costs until the opposing party calculated that surrender was cheaper than endurance. He was skilled at it. He had been practicing it for 22 years, and he had refined it into something approaching an art form, if art can be said to exist in the service of attrition. Ruby had documentation. She had 8 years of wire transfer records, and a handwritten will, and a neighbor who had watched the whole thing from 3 doors down for 2 decades. What she did not have was a Harris County attorney who knew Gerald Fitch's methods intimately enough to counter them before they accumulated into an insurmountable weight of delay and expense. Does she know yet? I said. Fitch's office contacted her yesterday evening, Dwight said. I imagine she is sitting with it this morning. I thought about Ruby on the Buffalo Bayou Trail the previous day, the measured, deliberate way she had laid out the cost of what I had done 11 years ago, the specific clarity of her anger, the absolute absence of self-pity in any of it. I thought about the $60 and the scholarship and the decision she had made at the side of the road in Bastrop County to keep driving. I thought about 8 years of wire transfers and a house on Belfort Avenue that she had paid off in silence and then said nothing about to anyone. "I want to connect her with you," I said. "That is why I called," Dwight said. "I will not bill her my standard rate. Dorothea asked me in February to be available if it came to this. I gave her my word." "She built quite a network," I said. "She was a remarkable woman," Dwight said, simply and without elaboration. "Get Ruby to call me." I ended the call and sat for a moment at my desk with the city laid out below me. The morning traffic on Louisiana Street, the pedestrians moving along the sidewalk toward the underground tunnel entrances that connected downtown's towers, the ordinary Tuesday machinery of a city going about its business with no awareness of the legal instrument that had been filed the previous afternoon against a woman who had done nothing except honor a promise to someone who needed her. I opened Ruby's contact on my phone. I looked at it. There is a version of this moment in which I talked myself out of calling. I can reconstruct it easily. She had told me she didn't need anything from me. I had been in her life for less than 48 hours after an 11-year absence. Calling this soon would read as the performative helpfulness of a man who wants to feel necessary rather than the genuine concern of one who actually is. The arguments were available, and they had a certain reasonable quality to them. I called her before I could finish making them. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice was flat and controlled in the specific register voices reach when a person has been crying, has decided they are finished with that, and has imposed a deliberate steadiness over whatever remains. "I know about the will contest," I said. A brief silence. "Of course you do," she said. There was no warmth in it, but she didn't hang up, and I registered that as precisely the thing it was. Not an invitation, but an open door left unlocked. "I want to connect you with someone," I said. "A property litigator named Dwight Okafor. He is among the best in Harris County for exactly this kind of matter, and he is prepared to take your case at a substantially reduced rate, because Dorothea specifically asked him to be available if this happened." Another silence, longer this time. "Dorothea asked him," she said. "In February, she called me in March. She was thorough, Ruby. She was building something from that bed." She was quiet long enough that I counted the seconds without intending to. 8, 9, 10. "She never said a word to me," Ruby said. Her voice was not broken. Ruby Layla did not break in front of other people. I was coming to understand this as a fixed and fundamental characteristic of her nature. But something moved underneath the steadiness of it. Something that was grief and gratitude wound so tightly together they had become a single, complex thing. "She knew you would have told her it wasn't necessary," I said. "It isn't necessary. I have resources. I can manage a legal dispute." "A prolonged Harris County will contest against an attorney who has been practicing delay tactics for over 2 decades, I said carefully. "While managing an active practice in Austin is a different matter than a straightforward legal dispute. Dwight has been on the opposing side of Gerald Fitch twice in the past 6 years. He won both times. That knowledge has specific and significant value that cannot be acquired quickly." A pause. I could hear her making the calculation, not emotionally, but practically, the way she approached every problem that mattered to her. "What does this Dwight Okafor want from me?" she said. "A conversation. Today, if possible. He will come to wherever you are staying." "I'm at a rental on Alameda Road in Midtown," she said, "near the old Alabama Theater. I'll give him your number." "Grayson." Her voice shifted, not softer, but more deliberate, the way a person speaks when they are being precise about something that matters to them. I want to be clear about something before we go any further. Tell me, I said. I am willing to speak with your attorney because Dorothea trusted him, and because the practical case you just made is sound. That is the complete reason. I am not agreeing to this because I owe you something, or because I'm comfortable being a situation that you manage. I understand that, I said. I need you to actually understand it, she said, not just say it. Ruby, I said. I watched you walk into a chapel yesterday where someone had removed your name from every surface and rearranged everything you paid for, and you sat in the last pew and said nothing and held yourself together without asking anyone for anything. I am not operating under any illusion about the kind of woman I am speaking to. I have never once confused your quietness for weakness, not 11 years ago, and not now. A silence. Then simply, all right. I'll text you his number within the hour. She ended the call without a closing word, which I had anticipated. I sat at my 38th floor desk and looked out at the city and thought about a woman on Almeida Road, opening her phone to a text from a man she had every reason not to trust, and choosing, carefully, with full awareness of the risk, to make one measured step forward anyway. My phone rang 20 minutes later, my mother's name on the screen. I had been expecting this call since the previous afternoon, since the moment I had sat down beside Ruby Layla in the fourth pew of Bradshaw Carter Memorial, and someone in that chapel had made note of it and begun composing a message. Houston's social network has always operated faster than its traffic. I let it ring through to voicemail. I was not ready for that conversation. But I understood, sitting at my desk with the city spread below me and a woman across town opening her phone, that ready or not, it was coming. Some conversations do not wait for you to feel prepared. They simply arrive and require you to decide, in real time, who you intend to be. I had spent 11 years being the wrong answer to that question. I did not intend to spend any more time that way. Chapter 5. She told me everything I deserved to hear. She chose the restaurant herself, as I had asked her to. At 4 in the afternoon, she sent a text with an address on Westheimer Road in the Upper Kirby district. A quietly established place with dark wood tables and a kitchen that took its ingredients seriously without requiring its guests to perform the same. No valet, no ambient music calibrated to communicate sophistication. A restaurant chosen by someone who wanted good food and a conversation that could be heard without effort. It was, like every decision I had observed Ruby Layla make, precisely calibrated to its actual purpose rather than to any impression it might create. I arrived 7 minutes early. She arrived exactly on time. She wore a dark linen dress and her hair pulled back with the practical simplicity of a woman who had dressed with care rather than for effect. There is a meaningful distinction between those two things, and Ruby understood it at a cellular level. She sat across from me and placed her phone face down on the table and looked at me with the clear, leveled attention I was coming to recognize as simply how she engaged with anything that genuinely mattered to her. "Dwight called me this afternoon," she said. "How did it go?" "He is thorough," she said, "and he is honest about the risks, which I appreciate considerably more than false reassurance. Gerald Fitch has filed a motion requesting a complete accounting of my financial relationship with Dorothea going back 10 years. Dwight says it is standard procedure for this type of contest and that the documentation I have will answer every question without ambiguity." "It will," I said. He also said the process will take between 3 and 6 months, regardless of the strength of our position, because Fitch will use every procedural instrument available to extend the timeline. She picked up the menu, scanned it with brief efficiency, and set it down. "I have a firm to run from Austin. I have 2 active projects and a third beginning its design phase. 3 to 6 months of divided attention is not an abstract inconvenience." I know, I said. I'm sorry this is happening. Don't apologize for things Celeste Wynne Pryor did, she said. It wastes time and it doesn't help anything. The waiter came. Ruby ordered without hesitation, grilled redfish, roasted vegetables, water with lemon. I ordered the same. When the waiter left, she folded her hands on the table and looked at me with an expression that told me something considered was coming. I want to say something to you, she said, and I need you to let me finish it completely before you respond. All right, I said. She looked at her hands for a moment, then at me. When you called this morning with Dwight's information, my first instinct was to say no, not because the help wasn't sound, it clearly was, but because accepting it meant accepting that you were back in my life in some functional capacity, and I have spent 11 years building a life in which that was not the case. She paused. I need you to understand what that construction cost, not so you can feel guilty. I have told you I have no use for your guilt, but because I think you are working with an incomplete picture of what you are actually asking for when you offer to be useful to me. And I will not let you proceed on incomplete information. I kept my face still and my mouth closed. I had promised her I would let her finish. I left Houston at 25 with a scholarship and $60 and a purpose I built almost entirely from anger, she said. Not grief, anger. I was furious at you for not fighting for me, furious at myself for not having anticipated it, furious at the specific grinding unfairness of being weighed and found insufficient by people who had never built a single thing with their own hands and didn't understand that I already had. She said this without any heat in her voice, which made it land harder than if she had shouted it. I pointed that anger at my work like a tool, and I did not stop. I did not date seriously for 4 years. I did not come back to Houston for 11. I did not allow myself to want anything that required another person's participation to obtain, because I had learned with complete clarity that relying on another person's courage was a risk I was not in a position to take again. She picked up her water glass, took one measured sip, set it down. That is what I built, she said. That is the full structure of what you're asking to be adjacent to. I need you to understand its actual dimensions before you decide whether you are genuinely prepared for what that means in practice. The food arrived. Neither of us moved toward it immediately. She had finished. I owed her the honest response, not the measured, diplomatically softened version a man constructs when he is more concerned with presenting himself favorably than with being true. She had not offered me careful language. She had offered me the actual thing. I owed her the same. You are right that I have an incomplete understanding, I said. And I will always have an incomplete understanding because I was not the one who drove out of this city with $60 and built something extraordinary in a place that had never heard my name. I cannot fully know what that cost. What I can do is listen every time you are willing to speak. She watched me. What I can tell you honestly, I continued, is that I am not asking to be in your life out of guilt or nostalgia, or the self-serving desire to revise a chapter of my own history that I'm not proud of. I'm asking because I have spent 11 years building something materially significant and discovering with increasing and uncomfortable clarity that the significance does not reach me the way I expected it to. I'm asking because a woman called me from a hospice bed to tell me about someone who had paid off her house for 8 years without telling anyone, and something in me understood immediately. Not gradually, not after consideration, but immediately, that I had let something irreplaceable walk out of my life, and that I had been too young and too cowardly to know it in time to stop it. I stopped. I am not asking you to forgive me, I said. I am asking you to let me be useful. Those are different requests. I mean the second one precisely and without any hidden terms. Ruby looked at me for a long moment. The restaurant moved quietly around us, the low register of other conversations, the soft rhythm of the kitchen, the amber light settling across the dark wood tables in a way that made the room feel considered rather than designed. "That is the most honest thing you have said to me," she said. "I am trying," I said. "I know." A brief pause. "That is what makes this complicated." We ate. The red fish was excellent, and the conversation moved to other territory. Her project in the Heights, the specific challenge of persuading clients that original building materials carry irreplaceable historical value that no modern substitute can replicate. When she spoke about her work, something shifted in her. The careful composure she maintained on personal ground relaxed slightly. Her hands moved. Her sentences came faster and with more color. She became, briefly and completely, someone who had temporarily forgotten to be defended, and it was the most unguarded I had seen her since the parking lot at Bradshaw Carter. I did not comment on it. I simply listened and paid attention, and stored every detail with the care of someone who understands that being trusted with a person's unguarded moments is not a small thing. After dinner, on the Westheimer sidewalk in the warm evening air, the upper Kirby streetlights casting their particular amber across the pavement, the Alabama Theater's Art Deco facade visible half a block east. Ruby looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. "There is something else," she said. "Tell me." "Celeste called my cell phone this afternoon, before Dwight. She told me that pursuing the will contest would become personally unpleasant for me, and that the cleanest resolution was for me to step back from the Belfort Avenue property in exchange for a financial settlement that would, in her words, compensate me for my years of service to her mother. The word service arrived with its full intended weight, and I felt the cold precision of my response to it, and kept every part of it entirely to myself. "What did you tell her?" I said. "I told her I would consult my attorney." Ruby's expression was composed and exact, and held something underneath it that was not anger in the ordinary sense. It was the particular, clear-eyed resolve of a woman who has been underestimated so many times by so many people that she has long since stopped being surprised by it and has simply decided what she intends to do about it. And then I called Dwight. "Good," I said. "Grayson." She looked at me steadily. "Whatever is developing between us, and I am not yet prepared to define what that is, it cannot become entangled with this legal matter. I need to win that case on the clear merits of what Dorothea intended, not on the weight of whose name I happen to be standing next to." "Understood," I said, completely and without reservation. She held my gaze for another moment. Then she extended her hand. It was a formal gesture, deliberate and precisely executed. A handshake, an agreement, a boundary, drawn with full clarity by a woman who understood exactly what she was doing. I took her hand. We shook once. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "Thank you for choosing the place," I said. Something crossed her face. Brief, involuntary. The closest approximation of a smile she had offered me since the parking lot. Then she walked to her car, and I stood on the Westheimer pavement and watched her go, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. "My mother. We need to talk. Come for dinner Sunday." I looked at the message for a moment. Then I put the phone away and stood in the amber light, thinking about a woman who had constructed an entire architecture of self-sufficiency from the raw materials of a single act of cowardice that had been mine. I thought about what it would take to be someone worthy of what she had built. I understood standing there that the question was not what it would take. The question was simpler and harder than that. The question was whether I was willing, without calculation, without condition, without asking her to acknowledge my progress, to do the work. The answer was yes. It had been yes for 11 years. I had simply not been honest enough with myself to know it until a dying woman made a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon in March and changed everything. Chapter 6. Both sides draw their lines. I drove to Tanglewood on Sunday evening with no particular optimism about how the night would proceed. My mother's house sits on a broad curving street off San Felipe Road. Set back behind a lawn, she tends with the same exacting attention she brings to everything she considers a reflection of the Stanley name. The live oaks along the Tanglewood Boulevard are magnificent, some of them 60 or 70 years old, their canopies interlocking overhead to form a long tunnel of shade that the neighborhood's residents treat as a shared inheritance rather than a private amenity. On summer evenings, the light filters through those trees in shafts and pools that make the street appear not merely affluent but permanent, as though it has always existed and always will. My mother chose this neighborhood with complete awareness of what it communicated. She has always been fluent in the language of real estate. My Aunt Patrice's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. I had not been told she would be there. I noted this without visible reaction, registered it for what it was, and went inside. My mother had prepared dinner with the thoroughness she brings to every occasion she has decided is significant. The table was properly set, linen napkins, the good china, candles lit at precisely the right moment to be at their most becoming when we sat down. Norma Stanley has always understood that environment shapes conversation. A carefully appointed table communicates that the matter being discussed deserves considered, measured attention. It also communicates, without a single word spoken, that certain decisions have already been formed and are now waiting, patiently, to be delivered. We sat, we ate. My mother asked about the Greenway Plaza acquisition, and I gave her the same level of detail I would offer any serious business partner. Patrice asked about a mutual contact in the Galleria real estate community, and I answered that too. The food was excellent, the conversation was careful. We were three people moving through the preliminary motions of a discussion that none of us had yet named. My mother set down her fork with the particular deliberateness that signals a transition. "I heard you had dinner on Westheimer Thursday evening," she said. "I did," I said. "With Ruby Layla?" "Yes." She looked at me with the expression she had been perfecting for 38 years, the one that conveys profound maternal concern while concealing the full calculation underneath it. At 64, Norma Stanley had not softened with age so much as concentrated. She had become more precisely herself with every passing year, the way certain materials become more potent through long, slow reduction. "Grayson," she said, "I think we both know this is not a simple matter." "I have no intention of treating it as one," I said. Patrice set her fork down. She was 59, my mother's younger sister, a woman whose convictions were identical to Norma's, but whose delivery had never acquired the same discipline. Where my mother was a scalpel, Patrice was a considerably blunter instrument, and she had always been the one deployed when precision seemed less necessary than force. "That woman is here because of a legal dispute," Patrice said. "She is contesting a will in Harris County, and she is looking for leverage wherever she can find it. Positioning herself next to the Stanley name while she is in the middle of a court proceeding is not a coincidence. It is a calculated move." I looked at my aunt with the steadiness I had learned, somewhat ironically, from my mother. "Ruby Layla is not contesting anything," I said. "She is defending a will written in her favor by a woman she cared for and financially supported for 8 consecutive years. The legal action was brought against her by Celeste Wynne Pryor. I want to be precise about that distinction because it is not a small one." "You are being naive," Patrice said. "Tell me specifically, not in general terms, specifically, what Ruby has done that you are characterizing as calculated," I said. Patrice opened her mouth. She closed it. She reached for her wine. "She managed a $3 million historic preservation project in Austin last year from a firm she built entirely without assistance from anyone who already knew her name," I continued. "She has been making monthly wire transfers to a woman in South Park for 8 years without telling a single person. She did not contact me when she came to Houston. I contacted her. If what she is executing is a strategy, Patrice, it is the least efficient strategy I have ever observed from a woman of her evident capability. The table was quiet. My mother looked at me with the expression she reserves for moments when I have said something she cannot immediately answer. It was not defeat. Norma Stanley has never done defeat. But it was a recalibration. She was revising her approach in real time, the way she had always revised things, silently, without acknowledging that a revision was occurring. "We built this family's standing from very little," she said with great composure. "Your father and I started with nothing. What we have now took 20 years of careful, deliberate work. The associations you make publicly, the relationships that are visible in this city, they carry weight that you may not fully appreciate because you have always had the benefit of what we constructed before you arrived." "I appreciate it," I said. "I have always appreciated it. What I will not do is repeat what happened 11 years ago." My mother looked at me directly. "That is a significant thing to say at my dinner table," she said. "I know that," I said. "I am saying it clearly in this room, so that there is no ambiguity later about what my position is." A long silence. Patrice looked at her plate. My mother looked at me with the expression of a woman encountering a version of her son she had not previously had occasion to meet and was not certain what to do with. I did not fill the silence for her. I let it hold exactly as long as it needed to. I left Tanglewood at 9:30 and drove home through the upper Kirby streets, past the Amber District signage, past the Westheimer restaurant where Ruby and I had sat 3 nights earlier with our phones face down and the honest weight of things said plainly between us. I called Ruby when I got home. She answered on the second ring. "How was your evening?" I said. A brief pause. She had expected something else as an opening. "Productive," she said. "Dwight called this afternoon with the details of Fitch's latest filing. Our position remains strong." "And personally," I said, "how are you?" A longer pause. "Denise came by," she said. "My cousin." She drove over from Sunnyside and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours and gave me every reason, in considerable detail, why trusting you again is a decision I am going to regret. I absorbed this. "What did you tell her?" I said. "I told her I don't make decisions based on fear," Ruby said, "and that I would make my own assessment on my own timeline." "That sounds like you," I said. "Denise is not wrong to be careful," Ruby said. "I want you to understand that. She has watched me from a distance for 11 years, and she knows exactly what that year cost me. Her caution is not irrational. It is love expressing itself the only way it knows how when it is afraid." "I know," I said. "She loves you. She's doing what people do when they are watching someone they love consider a risk that has already hurt them once." Ruby was quiet for a moment. "How did your family dinner go?" she said. My mother was composed and strategic. Patrice was less so. I said what I needed to say. Which was? That I would not be repeating the decisions of 11 years ago. A long silence. Outside my window, the Houston night was thick and warm, the city lights spreading south toward the ship channel in a long amber reach. "Grayson," Ruby said carefully, "both our families are going to continue having opinions about this situation." "Yes," I said, "and the legal proceeding is going to generate its own pressure for the next several months." "Yes. I need to know," she said, "that you can hold your position under sustained ordinary pressure, not in a dramatic confrontation where the right choice is obvious and there is an audience watching. In the accumulative, unglamorous pressure of weeks passing and people expressing their concerns, and the situation requiring you to simply remain consistent when there is nothing heroic about it and no one is paying particular attention. It was the most exact articulation of what she needed from me that she had yet offered. She was not asking whether I loved her. She was asking something more demanding and more specific than that. She was asking whether I was built for the long, quiet, unwitnessed work of being someone she could actually rely on. "Yes," I said, "I can hold it." "I'm going to hold you to that," she said. "I know," I said. "I am counting on it." She said goodnight, and the call ended. I sat in my chair by the window for a long time, looking out at the city my father had made his fortune in, and my mother had shaped a name in, and Ruby Layla had left at 25 and returned to, 11 years later, for a funeral she had organized, and a house she had quietly paid for, and a conversation in a parking lot that neither of us had arranged. I thought about Denise Layla Birch at a kitchen table in Midtown. I thought about Norma Stanley at a dinner table in Tanglewood. Two women who loved different people, arriving from opposite directions at the same fear, that someone they cared for was about to be hurt by someone who had not yet demonstrated that they were capable of being better. They were not wrong to be afraid. The only answer to that fear was not a conversation. It was not a declaration made at a dinner table or a promise offered across a phone line in the dark. The only answer was time, consistent, unspectacular, accumulating time. The kind that does not ask to be acknowledged and does not require an audience and builds its case slowly through the weight of ordinary days conducted with honesty and care. I had wasted 11 years of it. I was finished wasting it. Chapter 7. The hallway at the courthouse. The will contest hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in August, 6 weeks after Dorothea's funeral. 6 weeks is a compressed timeline for Harris County civil proceedings. Dwight had pushed for expedited scheduling on the grounds that the contested property was generating ongoing carrying costs and that the prolonged uncertainty was causing material, documentable harm to the named beneficiary. Gerald Fitch had objected. Delay was Fitch's primary instrument, and he deployed it with the reflexive ease of long habit. The judge, the Honorable Constance Abubakar, who had presided over the Harris County civil bench for 14 years and had seen Fitch's procedural strategies in several prior matters, denied his continuance request without extended comment. Dwight told me this with quiet satisfaction the evening the ruling came through. I woke at 5:30 the morning of the hearing and was at my desk by 6:45. I reviewed nothing. I sat with my coffee and watched the sunrise move across the east face of 1500 Louisiana, and I thought about a woman somewhere across the city who was preparing to walk into a courtroom and defend 8 years of faithful, unannounced love against a family that had decided to call it something else. I had no legal standing at that hearing. I had no role to perform inside that room. I had no professional or personal justification for being anywhere near the Harris County Civil Courts building at Fannin and Congress that morning. I drove there anyway. I had made my peace with that decision before I started the car. The Harris County Civil Courts building sits on the full block at Fannin and Congress in the oldest section of downtown Houston, a 6-story classical revival structure built in 1910 from pink Texas granite and light brown brick, with a central dome and Corinthian columns and a ring of carved stone eagles circling the dome's base. A $52 million restoration completed in 2012 returned it to something close to its original condition, though the building's essential character, solid, deliberate, the architecture of a city that had decided to take itself seriously, had never really left. It is the kind of building that makes you straighten slightly when you enter it, not from intimidation, but from some instinctive recognition that certain spaces carry the accumulated weight of consequential decisions and deserve to be treated accordingly. I arrived at 8:15 and found a seat in the second-floor public corridor outside the courtroom where the hearing would be held. The corridor was high-ceilinged and marble-floored, with tall windows overlooking Fannin Street and the morning traffic below. People moved through it with the particular purposefulness of individuals who are either late for something important or working hard not to appear nervous about it. I was the only person sitting entirely still. Celeste Wynne Pryor arrived at 8:40, with 2 attorneys and 4 family members arranged around her with the coordinated visual presentation of a group that had discussed its appearance in advance. She wore a black dress and a composed expression, and she did not look in my direction, which told me she had seen me and calculated that acknowledging me served no tactical purpose. Ruby arrived at 8:55 with Dwight Okafor. I had not seen her in 2 weeks. We had spoken by phone, brief, practical conversations about the legal timeline and the documentation Dwight was assembling. She had been in Austin managing her firm through the disruption of divided attention, doing precisely what she had told me she would do, holding her position without complaint and without asking me to manage the weight of it for her. She looked composed, a dark blazer and tailored trousers, a leather portfolio under one arm, the matter-of-fact bearing of someone who has done the work and knows it. Dwight walked beside her, a tall, unhurried man in his late 40s who moved through the courthouse corridor with the particular ease of someone who has been in this building many times and has not once left it without having accomplished what he came to do. Ruby saw me when she reached the midpoint of the corridor. Her step did not change. Her expression did not visibly shift. But she held my gaze for 2, 3 seconds, and in that brief, contained exchange was something I have thought about many times since. It was not surprise. It was not quite gratitude, though it contained elements of both. It was something closer to the acknowledgement of a fact she had not allowed herself to expect, and was now quietly incorporating into everything else she understood to be true. Then she went through the courtroom door with Dwight, and I returned to my corridor chair to wait. The hearing lasted 2 hours and 47 minutes. I know this because I watched the marble corridor clock with the specific, patient attention of a person who has nothing to do except exist in a space and wait for something he cannot influence to resolve itself. People moved through the corridor around me, attorneys with document carts, clerks on unhurried errands, a family navigating a different courtroom with the hollow-eyed look of people experiencing the worst week of their lives. A young man in a suit slightly too large for him sat across from me for 20 minutes, reading the same page of a legal document without appearing to absorb any of it. I thought about what was happening on the other side of those courtroom doors. Dwight laying out 8 years of wire transfer records with the methodical precision he brought to every matter he tried. Gerald Fitch deploying his counter-narrative, the elderly woman, the isolation, the opportunistic younger person who had identified a vulnerability and cultivated it carefully over time. I thought about Vera Hutchins, the neighbor, who had lived 3 houses down from Dorothea on Belfort Avenue for 22 years, who had agreed to testify because she was 81 years old and had decided she had very little left to lose by simply telling the truth in a room full of people who needed to hear it. I thought about the letter Dorothea had written 3 years before her death, the careful handwriting, the witness signatures, the deliberate placement where it would be found. I thought about a woman in a hospice bed making phone calls, building a structure around the person she loved most, preparing for every contingency with the systematic care of someone who understood that love, in its most mature expression, is not a feeling but an action taken in advance on behalf of another person's future. I thought about all of it for 2 hours and 47 minutes. The courtroom doors opened at 11:42. Ruby came out first. She walked into the corridor with her leather portfolio under her arm and her posture exactly as it had been when she went in, straight spine, chin level, the controlled bearing of a woman who has held herself together through sustained discipline and is now conducting a careful internal assessment of whether she can exhale. She saw me standing by the window. Something crossed her face. I have tried many times to find a single word for it, and have never found one adequate. It was not relief, not surprise, not gratitude alone. It was something in the territory of being genuinely witnessed, of realizing that a person had occupied a corridor chair for nearly 3 hours, for no reason except that they chose to, and feeling the full specific weight of that choice arrive somewhere it mattered. I walked toward her. We met in the center of the corridor. "How did it go?" I said. "The judge has taken it under advisement," she said. "Dwight believes we will have a ruling within 2 weeks. He described the record as clean, which from Dwight means considerably more than it would from most people." "It is clean," I said. "It has always been clean." She looked at me steadily. "You have been here since before 9, she said. "Yes." "You had no reason to be here." "I had every reason to be here," I said. "I simply had no legal standing. Those are meaningfully different things." She held my gaze for a moment that contained more than either of us chose to put into words. Around us, the corridor conducted its ordinary business. Footsteps, voices, the distant administrative percussion of the building processing the day's proceedings. Then I saw Celeste Wynne Pryor emerge through the courtroom door. She stopped when she saw us standing together in the corridor. She looked at Ruby first, then at me, then at the two of us as a single assembled fact, present in the marble hallway of the Harris County Civil Courts building in a way she had not anticipated and could not immediately categorize. I watched her expression shift. Not dramatically. Celeste Wynne Pryor did not traffic in dramatic expression. What shifted was the quality of her attention. She was no longer looking at Ruby as an isolated problem. She was looking at a situation that had acquired a dimension she had not accounted for, and she was revising her response to it in real time. I held her gaze for precisely as long as it took to communicate that I had seen what she was doing and was entirely unimpressed by it. Then I returned my full attention to Ruby, deliberately and without haste, in a way that made clear where my attention belonged and intended to remain. "Come on," I said quietly. "I'll walk you out." We crossed the marble floor together toward the Fannin Street exit, past the tall windows and the carved eagles overhead, and the clock that had measured every minute of those 167. The morning light came through the glass in long, clear shafts that fell across the granite floor in precise rectangles, moving slowly with the sun. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Ruby stopped and looked up at the August sky for a moment. It was a small private gesture, the kind a person allows themselves when they are finally permitting a feeling that has been held at careful distance to arrive fully. "Dwight says we won," she said. Not with elation, with the gravity of someone receiving something they have been owed for a long time and are not yet certain they are permitted to fully claim. "Yes," I said. "That is what he means." She nodded once, slowly. I said nothing. Some moments do not require words. They require only the presence of someone who understands exactly what the thing cost and who stands beside you while you let yourself feel it, not to manage the feeling or direct it or offer commentary on it, but simply to be there as a witness, which is the most honest and the most useful thing one person can sometimes offer another. I stood beside her on those Fannin Street steps in the August heat, and I let her feel it. That was all. That was everything. Chapter 8. 4 days of silence, and what I did with them. The rumor reached me on a Wednesday morning through a man named Prescott Delahaye. Prescott was a commercial broker I had known for 9 years, well-connected, reliable, the kind of man who moved through Houston's real estate and social circuits with the frictionless ease of someone who had invested equally in both. We had breakfast occasionally at a place on Westheimer he preferred for its corner booth and its distance from the kinds of people who would interpret a breakfast meeting as an event worth noting. He called me on a Wednesday and said he had heard something the previous afternoon at a River Oaks lunch that he thought I deserved to know about before it reached me through a less considerate channel. He delivered it the way careful men deliver unwelcome information, with a brief acknowledgement of his own reluctance, an accounting of the source, and then the thing itself stated plainly enough that there was no ambiguity about its content or its intended damage. The story moving through certain Houston rooms was this. Ruby Layla had a documented history of cultivating relationships with vulnerable elderly individuals of means, manufacturing emotional dependency, and positioning herself to benefit financially when those individuals were no longer able to speak for themselves. The story further suggested that her return to Houston and her renewed proximity to me specifically was not coincidental but strategic, an extension of the same pattern applied now to a different category of target. I thanked Prescott. I ended the call. I sat at my desk on the 38th floor of 1500 Louisiana and looked at the city for a long time without processing any of what I was seeing. I knew where the story had originated without needing to investigate. Not because I had evidence in the legal sense, no document, no recorded exchange, no direct witness to a specific conversation, but because the story had two essential qualities that identified its authors as precisely as a signature. It was specific enough to be credible and vague enough to be untraceable. And it served the simultaneous interests of exactly two people in Houston who had both the motive and the social access to move something like this through the right rooms quickly enough to do damage before it could be answered. Celeste Wynne Pryor needed to discredit Ruby before Judge Abubakar issued her ruling. My mother needed to construct enough social friction around Ruby's name that the path of least resistance for me became distance. They had found each other. I had not moved quickly enough to prevent it. I drove to Tanglewood before I had finished deciding to go. My mother was home. She had been expecting my call and had been expecting me instead, which told me she had already reviewed the situation and arrived at her position before I walked through the door. I stood near the window of the sitting room. I did not sit. I told her what I knew about the story circulating through Houston's social circuit, where I believed it had originated, and what its purpose was. I told her what Prescott Delahaye had reported, and what the story contained, and what it was designed to do. She listened with her hands folded, and her expression entirely composed. She did not deny knowing Celeste Wynne Pryor. She did not deny that a conversation had occurred. What she said, with the careful precision she brought to every position she occupied, was that she had simply shared her genuine concerns with someone who had expressed similar ones, and that she could not be held responsible for what other people chose to do with information exchanged in the course of a private conversation. She said this without any visible discomfort. That, more than anything else, was the most clarifying thing about the moment. I looked at my mother, this woman who had worked 3 jobs when my father's first business collapsed, who had held our family together through genuine hardship with a ferocity and a discipline I had always genuinely admired, who had taken the opportunity created by my father's land deal and built it into something that had given all of us security and standing and choices that would not otherwise have been available to us. I understood, standing in her sitting room, that everything she had ever done had come from a form of love, a love that was controlling and strategically expressed and blind to certain things it needed to see, but love, nonetheless, in the only vocabulary she had been given. That understanding did not change what I had to say. "I want to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to hear it precisely, not around the edges of it." She looked at me without expression. "What you did 11 years ago, when you pressured me to end things with Ruby, I allowed that to happen. I was 27 years old, and I lacked the conviction to choose her over your disapproval, and that was my failure, not yours. I have carried the cost of it every year since, and I am not here to redistribute it." I paused. "I am here because what you are doing right now is not a different thing happening in a different context. It is the same thing using different instruments. And I need you to understand, not as a threat, but as a fact I am stating with complete clarity that if you continue, you will not lose Ruby from my life. You will lose me." The room was entirely quiet. I had said it without anger, without volume, without the performance of a dramatic ultimatum. I had said it the way you state a structural fact about a building. Here is what will happen if this load is applied to this wall. Not a warning, a description of physical reality. My mother looked at me for a long time. Something moved across her face that I had not seen there in 38 years of watching it. Not defeat. Norma Stanley has never done defeat. It is not in her constitution. Something more complicated. The recognition of a man standing in front of her, who had at some point she had not precisely identified, grown into someone she had not fully accounted for. The recognition that her son was no longer the 27-year-old who had absorbed her pressure without resistance. "I hear you," she said finally. 3 words, not an apology, not a capitulation, the precise acknowledgement of a woman of considerable pride, conceding that something had been said that required her to revise her understanding of the situation. I nodded once. I left. Ruby texted me that evening. A single sentence. "I heard about the rumor. I need a few days to think." I wrote back, "Take what you need. I'm here." She did not respond. She did not call. 4 days passed. On the first day, I went to my office and managed the morning adequately, and the afternoon not at all. I sat at my desk and stared at documents I could not concentrate on and thought about the particular texture of waiting, the way it settles into the chest with a weight that is not quite pain but is located in the same general territory. On the second day, I drove to Sunnyside. I parked on the residential street where Ruby had grown up, a block of modest frame houses and one-story brick homes on wide lots, carrying the particular quality of a neighborhood that has been through significant difficulty and has not been fully restored from it, but has endured with a stubborn, unperforming dignity that is its own form of courage. Oleanders in several front yards. A man washing his truck 3 houses down, the water running bright across the hot pavement. 2 children on bicycles moving slowly up the block. I sat in my car for 40 minutes. I was trying to understand something I had never adequately understood from a distance, what it had cost a 9-year-old girl to grow up on this street after her mother died, in Dorothea Wynn's house, with no safety net and no family name and no external evidence that the world intended to offer her anything, and to construct from those materials a woman of the particular quality and substance that Ruby Layla had become. I was trying to feel the actual distance between where she had started and where she had arrived, not to claim any part of that journey as mine, but to understand its true dimensions before I asked her to take any further step forward with me. I owed her that understanding, not the intellectual version I had been carrying, the felt version, the one that arrives in the body rather than the mind and does not leave when you drive away. On the 3rd day, I wrote her a message, 4 sentences, honest and plain, and containing nothing that required anything from her in return. I looked at it for a long time, then I deleted it. Not because it was dishonest, but because it was unnecessary. Because what Ruby needed from me during those 4 days was not my words arriving in her phone, but my demonstrated capacity to be patient and present, and still without demanding acknowledgement of my patience. The message, however sincere, would have been about my discomfort rather than her need. I deleted it and sat with the quiet. On the 4th day she called. I answered on the first ring. Her voice was not fragile or burdened. It was the voice of a woman who had used 4 days the way she used every resource available to her, with full intentionality, extracting precisely what they had to offer, and arriving on the other side with her position clarified and her direction established. I needed to be certain, she said, that what I was feeling had nothing to do with the legal situation or the pressure from both our families or the specific vulnerability of being in Houston for the first time in 11 years. I needed to separate all of those variables and examine what remained when they were removed. "And," I said. "What remains," she said carefully and without ornamentation, "is that I trust Dorothea's judgment more than I distrust my own fear. She called you for a reason. She called Dwight for a reason. She built what she built around me for a reason. Dorothea Wynne did not make decisions carelessly or sentimentally. If she decided you were worth calling, I owe it to her judgment to find out whether she was right." I was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean for us?" I said. "It means," Ruby said, "that I am willing to find out. On my terms, at my pace, with the complete and unambiguous understanding that the first time you choose someone else's comfort over my dignity, we are finished, permanently and without negotiation." "Yes," I said, "I mean that, Grayson." "I know you mean it," I said. "That is precisely why I said yes, without hesitation." Outside my window, the Houston night had settled into its familiar amber sprawl. Somewhere across the city, in a rental on Alameda Road, a woman who had built everything she had from the raw material of loss and abandoned expectation was sitting with her phone and her clarity and one carefully measured willingness to take a risk she had sworn off 11 years ago. I thought about 4 days of silence. I thought about 40 minutes parked on a street in Sunnyside, trying to understand something in my body that I had only ever understood in my head. I thought about a message written and deleted, and the specific, uncomfortable discipline of choosing stillness when every instinct was pushing toward action. She had been doing the harder version of all of this for 11 years. 4 days was the very least the situation required of me. I understood that now, without qualification. Chapter 9. What she said when she called back. The ruling came on a Thursday morning, 2 weeks after the hearing. Dwight called me at 8:53. He did not open with pleasantries. Dwight never did when he had a result to deliver. He said, "Judge Abubakar ruled in Ruby's favor. Full ruling. The will stands as written. The Belfort Avenue property transfers to Ruby Layla. Fitch has 45 days to file a notice of appeal, and based on the record, I do not expect him to. There is nothing substantive to appeal." I thanked him and ended the call, and sat at my desk for a moment, not looking at anything in particular, allowing the full weight of what had just been confirmed to arrive without rushing it along. Not a procedural compromise, not a narrow decision that left room for further contest. A full ruling in favor of a handwritten document that Dorothea Wynne had composed 3 years before her death and placed where it would be found. The final deliberate act of a woman who had spent her last months making sure that the person she loved most would not be left unprotected. I called Ruby immediately. She answered before the first ring had fully completed, which told me she had been awake and waiting, phone in hand, for some time before my call arrived. "Dwight rang me as well," she said. Her voice was steady and quiet and held something underneath the steadiness, not quite emotion in the way the word is commonly used, but the specific release of a sustained, disciplined pressure, the particular exhale of someone who has been holding something with great care for a very long time and has finally, with full authority, been given permission to set it down. "It is done," I said. "Yes," she said. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The silence of two people sitting inside, a moment that has finally arrived and does not require language to justify its significance. "I want to go to the house," she said. "Today, this morning. Will you come?" "Yes," I said. "Tell me when." We met on Belfort Avenue at 10:15. The house was a single-story brick home on a wide South Park lot, built in the early 1960s for working families who wanted something solid and permanent and entirely their own. A covered front porch with 2 concrete steps, a storm door with a decorative aluminum screen, a mature pecan tree in the front yard spreading its canopy across the porch in the morning light. The neighbor, who had lived 3 doors down for 22 years, had been maintaining the lawn in the weeks since Dorothea's passing, which was the kind of thing that happens in neighborhoods where people have been watching over each other for long enough that it becomes reflex. Ruby was already there when I arrived. She stood on the front walk, not yet on the porch, looking at the house with the specific quality of attention she brought to buildings she cared about. Unhurried, full, as though she were reading something the structure had been writing about itself over 60 years of ordinary and extraordinary occupation. I parked and walked to where she stood and said nothing. She was not ready to speak, and I had learned enough in the preceding weeks to recognize that and to honor it without filling the silence with my own need to be useful. She stood there for perhaps 3 minutes. Then she walked up the 2 concrete steps and placed her hand on the porch railing. She moved her palm slowly along the painted iron, a single, deliberate gesture, the way you touch something you were not entirely certain you would ever be permitted to keep. I watched her do it, and I understood that the gesture contained everything the legal proceeding had been about, and everything the 8 years before it had been about, and everything Dorothea Wynne had understood when she sat in this house and made her careful decisions about what she wanted to happen when she was gone. Denise Layla Birch arrived 20 minutes later. She pulled up in a blue sedan and crossed the lawn with the purpose of a woman who has rearranged her mourning to be somewhere that matters. She was 41 years old, with the kind of face that communicated its feelings with complete directness and no apparent interest in softening them for the benefit of observers. She had driven from Sunnyside the moment Ruby called her. She embraced Ruby on the porch, a long, firm embrace that required no explanation and no commentary, the embrace of 2 women who had grown up understanding the same difficult things and had carried those things separately for a long time and were now standing together on the porch of the house that represented, in its particular and specific way, the best of what either of them had come from. Then Denise turned and looked at me. She held the look for a long, unambiguous moment. The look of a woman who had formed her assessment of me 11 years ago and had spent the intervening time seeing no reason to revise it, and who was now conducting a fresh evaluation with both eyes open and no particular inclination toward generosity. I held her gaze steadily, and I nodded once. Not an appeal for her approval, an acknowledgement of her love for Ruby, of the absolute legitimacy of her caution, of the fact that she had earned every right to be watchful, and that I had no standing to ask her to be otherwise. The nod said, "I know exactly what you are doing, and I am not asking you to stop." Denise held the look for another moment. Then she returned her attention to Ruby. "Come inside," Ruby said. "I want to see what the house needs." We spent 2 hours in that house. Denise moved through it with the practical inventory of a woman already calculating what restoration would require, what needed cleaning, what needed repair, what could be recovered, and what had to be replaced. Ruby moved through it differently, slowly, touching things, pausing in doorways, standing in rooms that held particular weight for lengths of time that had nothing to do with assessment and everything to do with memory. The kitchen where Dorothea had fed a 9-year-old girl who arrived with nothing. The small back bedroom that had been Ruby's for 7 years. The front sitting room with its west-facing window and its particular afternoon light that Ruby said she had been carrying in some unexamined part of her memory without knowing she was carrying it. I stayed in the background and was useful when usefulness was specifically required, lifting a box from the back room, noting a section of porch railing that would need attention, helping Denise assess the floor under a piece of furniture. Otherwise, I was present and quiet, and I let the house be what it needed to be, for 2 women who had arrived with history, and grief and love wound so tightly together, they had become a single, complex thing. In the early afternoon, while Denise worked through the kitchen, Ruby came and stood beside me on the front porch. We stood in the pecan tree's shade without speaking for a while. "She would have liked this," Ruby said finally. "Knowing it came to this, the house full again." "Yes," I said. "I think she planned on it." Ruby looked at me. "Dorothea never did anything by accident," she said. "Every decision she made had a considered purpose behind it. The phone calls she made before she died, to you, to Dwight, to whoever else we don't yet know about, those were not impulses. She had thought through every piece of what she was building." "I know," I said. "She was giving me a running start," Ruby said quietly. "She understood what Celeste would do. She knew I would arrive in Houston alone and underprepared for what was waiting, so she put people in position before I got here." A pause. "She spent her last months building a structure around me that I didn't know I was walking into until I was already inside it." Her voice was not broken, but it was full in a way that the word full cannot adequately contain, carrying everything she felt about a woman who had loved her with that particular precision, who had expressed love not as feeling, but as forethought, not as warmth, but as architecture. I did not offer comfort. She was not broken and did not need comfort. I stood beside her under the pecan tree and let her feel the full weight of what she was feeling, which is the only genuinely honest thing one person can offer another in a moment that belongs entirely to them. After a while she straightened. Her breathing settled. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask me," I said. "The 4 days," she said, "when I went quiet. What did you actually do?" I told her about the first day at my desk, the morning that produced adequate work, and the afternoon that produced nothing. I told her about driving to Sunnyside on the second day and parking on her childhood street and sitting in the car for 40 minutes, trying to understand the full felt distance between where she had started and where she had arrived. I told her about writing the message on the third day and deleting it, not because it was dishonest, but because it was mine rather than hers, and what she needed from me during those 4 days was not my words, but my demonstrated capacity to be still. I told her about the 4th day and what it taught me about the specific weight of being someone else's silence. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet. "You went to Sunnyside," she said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I needed to understand something in my body that I had only ever understood in my head," I said. "I needed to feel the actual dimensions of what you built and where you built it from before I asked you to take another step forward with me. It seemed like the minimum the situation required." Ruby looked at the street in front of Dorothea's house for a long time. A car passed slowly. The pecan tree moved slightly in the warm air. "That," she said carefully, "is the first thing you have done that Dorothea would have recognized as the right instinct." It was the most significant thing she had said to me since the parking lot outside Bradshaw Carter Memorial. I received it with the full weight it carried and said nothing in return, because some things deserve the respect of silence rather than the impulse to fill it. Denise appeared in the doorway behind us. She looked at me. She looked at Ruby. She looked at the street with the expression of a woman in the process of revising a long-held position with the reluctance and the care that genuine revision requires. "I'm getting lunch," she said. "There's a catfish place on Martin Luther King that's been there since before either of you were born. You coming or not?" It was not forgiveness. It was not an endorsement. It was a practical woman leaving a door open precisely as far as she had decided, in this moment, that it should be open, no further, but genuinely open. Ruby looked at me. "Yes," I said. "I would like that very much." Denise went inside for her bag without comment. Ruby turned back to the street one last time. The pecan tree's shadow moved across the front walk, in the slow, living pattern of something that has been growing in one place for a very long time and has no intention of going anywhere. "One day at a time," Ruby said. Not specifically to me, to the house, to the street, to Dorothea, to herself, to all the accumulated weight of everything that had led, by a route none of them could have predicted, to this particular Thursday afternoon on Belfort Avenue in South Park. "One day at a time," I said. And then Denise came through the storm door with her bag on her shoulder, and we walked down the 2 concrete steps together into the South Park afternoon, and I thought about a woman who had made phone calls from a hospice bed and changed the direction of 3 lives without any of us understanding, until now, what she had actually built. She had not simply protected a house. She had protected the people who needed to find their way back to one another. She had simply known, with the clear and patient wisdom of someone who had loved a person from childhood, what they needed, and had spent her last months ensuring they would not miss it. Chapter 10. What I know now, that I wish I knew then. My mother called Ruby on a Monday morning 3 weeks after the ruling. Not me, Ruby directly. I found out afterward when Ruby mentioned it in the particular offhand way she offers significant information, without theatre, without preamble, placed inside an ordinary conversation the way you set a meaningful object on a table and allow the other person to understand its weight without being told. "Your mother called me this morning," she said. "We were at Herman Park, on a bench beside the Mary Gibbs and Jesse H. Jones reflection pool, on a Tuesday afternoon when neither of us had anywhere we were required to be. The pool stretched 740 feet before us, its black-bottomed surface designed to hold the sky in perfect stillness. The live oaks and the light above doubled in the water below, the world appearing twice as large and half as urgent as it felt from any other vantage point in the city. A family moved along the decomposed granite path on the far side. A man on another bench 50 yards distant read something on his phone with the absorbed concentration of a person genuinely grateful for a quiet hour. "What did she say?" I asked. "4 sentences, Ruby said. "Tell me." Ruby looked at the water. "She said she had been thinking about what you told her in Tanglewood. She said she had also been thinking about things she observed at the memorial service that she had not at the time understood correctly. She said she had underestimated me, and she said she did not intend to do so again." I sat with that for a moment, the full picture of what those 4 sentences had cost Norma Stanley to compose and deliver. My mother had spent 40 years building a version of herself in which she did not make the kind of error that required this category of acknowledgement. She had built her family's standing, her social position, and her own self-understanding on the premise of correct assessment. To call a woman she had dismissed and say, "I underestimated you," was not, for Norma Stanley, a small act. It was a significant revision of a story she had been telling about herself for a very long time. "What did you say back?" I said. Ruby turned and looked at me with the particular expression she reserves for moments that require absolute precision. "I told her I knew," she said. She held my gaze without apology, without elaboration, without the slightest inclination towards softening what she had said or explaining it for my benefit. 4 words delivered to Norma Stanley, a woman who had spent 4 decades ensuring that the world understood she was not to be underestimated, and those 4 words were not a rebuke, not a declaration, not a performance of dignity. They were simply the truth, stated plainly by a woman who had never in her adult life felt the need to state anything else. I thought about what those 4 words contained, not the anger that would have been entirely understandable, not the graciousness that would have been easier and entirely false, not the forgiveness that was not yet earned, and that Ruby Layla would not perform before it was. What she had offered my mother was the one thing that my mother, in that moment, most needed to receive and least expected to hear from the person she had wronged. Recognition. The clear-eyed, unadorned acknowledgement of a woman who had been assessed incorrectly, who had known it at the time, and who was not going to pretend that the correction arrived without a cost that someone needed to understand had been paid. I knew it was the most complete and honest response available. It was everything. We sat beside the reflection pool for 2 hours that Tuesday afternoon. The conversation moved to her work, a 19th-century commercial block in Austin's East 6th Street corridor that the city had been attempting to preserve for nearly a decade without the right firm or the right vision attached to it. Ruby had been developing a proposal quietly for 4 months, working from documents and photographs and the few original architectural drawings that had survived in the city's records. She described the building's construction with the precise reverence she reserved for structures that had endured beyond their original expectation: the pressed tin ceilings, the cast-iron storefront columns, the upper floors sealed and forgotten for 30 years and therefore surviving intact, while everything around them had been altered or erased. I listened with the full attention her words deserved. I had spent 11 years building new things: glass and poured concrete rising from cleared ground, replacing what occupied a site with something shinier and more immediately profitable and more legible to the current market. There is nothing inherently wrong with that work. I had done it with genuine care, and I had done it well. But sitting beside a woman who spent her professional life understanding what old buildings had to say about the communities that had formed around them, I recognized something about my own practice that I had not previously examined directly. I had been building surfaces. Ruby was excavating meaning. Both were legitimate, but only one of them required you to understand what had come before as a condition of doing the work at all. "I want to propose something," I said, in the comfortable middle of the afternoon, when the light on the water had shifted to its softer, more horizontal quality. She looked at me. "The East 6th Street block," I said. "The financing for a project of that scope, for a firm of Layla Studios' current size, is not trivial. I have relationships with lenders who have structured deals around historic preservation tax credits before, people who understand the timeline and the specific financial architecture of this category of project. I am not proposing to take anything over. I am proposing to be useful in one specific, bounded way that keeps the project entirely yours and keeps the credit precisely where it belongs." Ruby studied me with the assessing steadiness I had come to recognize as her version of complete engagement, the expression she wore when something was receiving her full, unfiltered attention. "What do you want in return?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "That is not the transaction I'm describing." "Every arrangement has terms," she said. "Then the terms are this," I said. "You take the project. You build what you have been seeing in those documents for 4 months. And when the work is done, when that building is restored and occupied, and the city can finally see what you saw in it when no one else was paying attention, I get to be one of the people who knows that you did it." She looked at the water for a long moment. "That is a very unusual term," she said. "I know," I said. "It is also the honest one." The sun had moved lower. The live oaks cast their long afternoon shadows across the reflection pool, and the water held the light the way its black bottom had been designed to, doubling everything above it, making the sky and the trees appear to exist in 2 registers simultaneously, the real and the reflected, each equally present. I have built a great deal in this city. I have put the Stanley name on buildings that will outlast me by decades. I have closed transactions that moved significant capital through Houston's economy and created value that was real and measurable and earned through genuine work. I've done these things, and I've done most of them with care, and I want to be honest about what none of them produced. Not one floor of one building, not one signed document, not one moment of standing in something I had helped create has felt like this Tuesday afternoon feels. I want to be precise about the reason. It is not simply that Ruby Layla is sitting beside me, though she is, and that matters to me in ways I do not have adequate language for. The reason is something both simpler and more difficult than that. I am, for the first time in 11 years, sitting fully inside my own life, not observing it, not moving through the days with the competent detachment of a man who has constructed an impressive exterior around an interior he has quietly given up on. Actually inside it, present in it, inhabiting it the way a person inhabits something they have genuinely chosen rather than assembled as the most plausible alternative to what they actually wanted. That is what cowardice costs, not the dramatic, visible subtraction of the thing you failed to choose. The more insidious and enduring cost is the numbness. The way a life built around a wrong turn gradually loses its capacity to feel significant, no matter how objectively significant it becomes. You build, and you succeed, and you earn, and you find with a clarity that increases with every passing year that the significance does not reach you the way you expected it to, that you are always slightly outside the thing you are constructing, watching it rather than inhabiting it, because the version of yourself that could fully inhabit it made a decision 11 years ago that you have been navigating around ever since. I know this now. I knew none of it at 27. Here is what I have come to understand from everything that happened in these months. Cowardice does not arrive wearing its own name. It arrives dressed as practicality, as maturity, as protecting someone from a difficult situation they are better off being spared. I told myself at 27 that I was being reasonable, that ending things with Ruby was the considered decision of a man thinking clearly about complicated circumstances. I was doing none of those things. I was calculating the cost of choosing her against the cost of my mother's disapproval and deciding, without the honesty to admit the calculation to myself, that Ruby was the cheaper loss. She was 25 years old and I offered her silence where she deserved a fight, and she took that silence and drove out of Houston and built something magnificent without me. That is not a love story. That is a debt. The lesson, the one I carry from all of this and intend to carry for the rest of my life, is not a romantic one. It is not about love finding its way back, or about timing, or about the idea that what is meant to happen eventually does. Those are comforting stories. They are not the full truth. The full truth is this: the people who deserve your courage are almost never the ones who demand it loudly. They are the ones who will receive your silence with dignity, gather what belongs to them, and construct a life so deliberate and so complete that it appears from the outside as though they never needed you at all. They build that appearance with great intentionality because they have learned through necessary experience that need is a vulnerability they cannot safely display. By the time you understand what you allowed to walk out the door, the question is not whether you are sorry. Regret is the easy part. It costs nothing and changes nothing. The actual question, the one that matters, the one that requires something of you, is whether you have become, through the slow and often uncomfortable work of honest self-examination, someone worth their time, not in the dramatic moments, not when the audience is watching and the right choice is obvious. In the ordinary, accumulating days when no one is observing, when there is nothing heroic about it. When consistency is the only currency that means anything, and the only way to build it is to show up, clearly and without calculation, one unremarkable day after another. Ruby Layla decided I had become that person. She did not decide it quickly. She did not decide it without full awareness of the risk she was accepting. She decided it the way she decides everything that matters to her, carefully, on her own timeline, with her eyes completely open. I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that decision, not because I owe it to her, though I do, but because becoming worthy of Ruby Layla is the most demanding and clarifying and genuinely purposeful work I have ever undertaken. and I have finally understood, after 38 years of building surfaces, that the daily, unspectacular, unwitnessed work of being someone she can rely on is not an obligation. It is the closest thing to meaning I have ever found. Ruby turned from the water and looked at me. "What are you thinking about?" she said. I considered the honest answer, the full one. "Dorothea," I said, and how clearly she saw what neither of us could see for ourselves, and how she spent her last months making sure we would not miss it. Ruby was quiet for a moment. Something crossed her face, private and tender and entirely her own. "She always could," she said softly. "From the time I was 9 years old, she always could." The reflection pool held the late afternoon sky above us, doubled and motionless. The live oaks breathed in the patient, unhurried way of trees that have been growing in the same place for 8 decades and have made their peace with every season that has passed through them. Behind us, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday, building and clearing and building again, the way cities do, the way people do, the way everything that is still alive does. We stayed until the light changed. Neither of us needed to be anywhere else. Neither of us wanted to be.